Well, moving on to the press review now. The threat to journalists in India is the focus of a lot of papers this Wednesday, and that comes after a report by around 30 different media outlets led by the nonprofit organization Forbidden Stories. Our press reviewer, Diptika Laurent, is here with more.
Well, Aaron, the Paris-based Forbidden Story nonprofit aims to continue and publish the work of journalists who've faced persecution in their work as reporters, facing threats, facing prison, sometimes even murder. Their latest report sheds light on the murder of an Indian journalist, Gauri Lankesh. She was murdered in 2017 in Bangalore, just as she was about to publish a report on disinformation. Her report, titled "In the Age of False News," looked at the rise of these fake news websites which trafficked in rumors to spread disinformation in India. It ultimately cost her life, and this is the report you see on the website of Forbidden Stories. Now, Gauri Lankesh was actually the inspiration for the Forbidden Stories Story Killers project, but she's sadly just a part of a very large group of female journalists who routinely face persecution for their work. The Washington Post is looking at that today, looking at various female journalists who have faced persecution for their work. The Washington Post actually is part of the 30 media outlets who collaborated with Forbidden Stories on this project. And the Washington Post reports that according to a 2021 report of over 700 female journalists in 215 countries, 75% of these women reported facing online abuse for their work. They're particularly susceptible to death threats, rape threats, harassment, verbal and online abuse, and occurring in countries varied across the world, from Brazil to India to Nigeria. Aaron.
Speaking of Nigerians, Dipti, they will be heading to the poll in 10 days' time to elect their new president.
That's right, and predictions are it'll be possibly the tightest race in the history of Nigeria, and that there could be a very high voter turnout. Now, the current president, Muhammadu Buhari, is not running, having basically maxed out the number of terms he can serve as president. Whoever the next president will be, however, will face very acute crises in the country, notably an unprecedented cash and gas crisis. The cash crisis came as a result of a failed cash swap plan last year to encourage more people to bank their money and hold less cash. It's led to even more poverty among Nigerians, perhaps for these aforementioned reasons. This online website from Nigeria called Premium Times, which is sort of described as an alternative to the mainstream media in Nigeria, has warned that it's not impossible that this presidential race will be determined not by voters, but, I quote, by ethnic bigots, shamanists, and clerics who will ask, possibly coerce people to vote in a certain way. What Nigeria needs, the paper says, is patriots, people who will put the country first. And right now, there is a scarcity of such people. Without these guardians, the website warns that violence could indeed overshadow these upcoming elections.
Certainly a lot on the line for Africa's most populous country. We'll change gears then, Dipti, and head to the United States, where a train derailment in the state of Ohio, which led to a chemical spill, continues to bring devastating repercussions to inhabitants there.
Well, it's a tragedy that garnered little media attention at the time. The New York Times has actually put together a timeline of exactly what happened. So this train derailment took place on February the 3rd. It derailed in East Palestine in Ohio. It's a small town of just under about 5,000 people. The train had been carrying chemicals and combustible materials, including vinyl chloride, which is particularly harmful to one's health. Now, there have been no fatalities from the disaster, but residents have reported feeling sick, having headaches since that derailment. That's what this local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, reports. They've also complained of sick or dead animals, seeing sick or dead animals, and a strong odor that's still lingering in the air after that accident. They also feel that, coupled with a lack of media attention for a chemical spill in a very small town, the well-being of the community is not has sort of taken a back seat, at least in the eyes of the the railway company who are more focused on trying to get their operations up and running. So these residents in this town really speaking out about this disaster in order to ensure that the media spotlight stays on it.
For this last story, Dipti, we're going to turn to something that perhaps hits close to home for a lot of us international expats in the French capital. That's the hit Netflix show Emily in Paris, apparently doing wonders and rehabilitating the image of Paris, at least for Americans.
Yeah, it's surprising. Emily in Paris, a show that represents no one's life in Paris, let's be honest, is doing wonders in restoring Paris's reputation as a romantic, beautiful, cool kind of capital. Paris's reputation has taken a hit in recent times, so much so that the Japanese actually have a term for it called Paris shokugan, which is sort of the post-traumatic stress of the disappointment when you realize that Paris is not what you imagined it to be. But perhaps thanks to Emily in Paris, that is all changing. According to a French poll for a travel website, 70%, this was in Le Figaro, 73% of Americans see Paris in a positive light, compared to just 39% in 2007, Erin. And of that figure, 89% have seen Emily in Paris. Moreover, 83% of Americans believe that life in Paris, in the show, reflects the real life of Parisians. That's perhaps more worrying because there is very little in Emily in Paris that actually represents our real life. I mean, I think you just need to be here on a day of strikes to know what real life in Paris is.
Indeed. I feel like this could be a vicious cycle where Americans are convinced by that show, they come back, and then that Japanese syndrome comes back about the reality.
Yeah, it's like Groundhog Day, isn't
it? Exactly. We'll see as a public service announcement, obviously, Paris is a lot more of a complex city than what you see in Emily in Paris. Dipti Laurent, thank you very much for the press review.